Welcome to this meeting of the Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee. Introduction. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is the High Street opposite the Guild. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Any substitutes this evening?
Yeah, we don't have any substitutes. I will pass over to Lynn because she can explain the reason why.
Yeah, apologies from Councillor Riaz. We had a substitute lined up, but unfortunately she's been unable.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Participation? Okay, so we'll move to the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 18th of October last year. Just go through, if anybody has any issue with a particular page, please say so. Page 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'll take that the minutes are an accurate representation of that meeting and sign them off. This meeting. So 5, which is the referral report from the Joint Consultative Safety Committee on the Equalities Policy.
Thank you, Chair. The committee will be aware that there is a regular review of policies underway, the employment relating ones going through the Joint Consultative and Safety Committee. The equalities policy that I've put before you tonight is an update on something that's pretty much 10 years old on the Council's website. So it's long overdue for review. Of course, these days, though, now it is not our only policy commitment to equalities. We have, since 2022, the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, which I know members will be aware of because you've had a hard copy, and we review at Policy and Resources Committee annually the progress against that strategy. So recognising what is the difference between a policy and a strategy, what we acknowledged was we need a sort of backbone of enforceable, brief statements that will serve as a simple overarching policy against which we can enforce compliance if necessary, whether that be in relation to the workforce or customers. That's a sort of necessary underpinning document. Obviously, it's not our only policy even, let alone our only strategy. And at the end of the document, the policy itself, I've referred to a number of other policies where we actually deal with equality issues, whether they be in relation to employees, dignity at work, family-friendly policies, or whether that relates to our customer complaints policy. So what I wanted to do was just really position this document as a set of clear and simple obligations so that if we can identify a breach, we can then deal with that under the appropriate provisions, whether those be disciplinary or customer facing. So understanding what that document should cover and making sure it didn't encroach on the ambitions of a strategy, it was necessary to sort of start again and take out some of the stuff that we had in our previous policy, which was really strategic aims and actions, which now all fit in the strategy instead. And so using this as a policy, we've based this on the ACAS template, but we've significantly expanded it to make sure it faces outwards to customers as well. And they're obviously summarised in the covering report what the changes are. It is effectively a new document. And it was reviewed and discussed at the JCSE meeting, which obviously involves the group leaders and the trade union representatives, and they recommended it to this committee for approval.
Okay. Go ahead, Leah.
Thank you, Chair. This is an area of law that I'm particularly familiar with. Unfortunately, I can't endorse what's before us because there are a number of gaping holes. It's lacking, it needs to be more robust and it lacks some depth. And in particular, if I could draw the committee's attention to one aspect of the report, I think it was 1.3 with regard to the protected characteristics group. There's a bit where it talks about race. There's some key points that need to be added on, which include race, including colour, nationality, ethnic or national origin. That needs to be added on. So I just feel there's no reference to direct or indirect discrimination. So I've just got my concerns about what's before us at the moment. I'm really sorry.
I mean, obviously not in a position to have a legal view. There was a I'm chair of the Joint Consultative and Safety Committee, and there was a useful discussion at that. I think what we've got before us is much more succinct document with some really important message. It's an important message about values and behaviours of this council. And I guess picking up your point, so are you saying that in paragraph 1.3 that is not the same as the wording in the Equality Act?
Protected characteristics, and it talks about after this there's got sections of those groups, and in the one section it's relating to one of the groups is race, and in fact it goes on to say race including colour, nationality, ethnic or national origin, but on this document it just says race.
Or is that your only problem with
No,
this?
it's the trouble is I just think it needs to have a bit more depth of talking about direct and indirect discrimination, really, as well. I just think it needs to be robust. This is a document that's going to last us for a number of years, and I just think it needs to have a bit more meat, depth to it, really. And I mean, you know, as a lawyer, I could go reams and reams and reams of paper, but we don't want that. We want a working policy document, and I just don't think it goes to succinct detail, really. It's not robust enough.
You on how Qualities Act, whether the way in which it's worded.
Well, I believe it does. Where there's a question of policy drafting, as a lawyer myself, how much you replicate the text of legislation or how much you say compliant with the Equality Act. Paragraph 1.4, absolutely, you could write chapter and verse. It is against the law to discriminate, victimise or harass people because of these protected characteristics. That's our policy statement. So I'm unclear what benefit we would obtain by expanding on the legal definitions. I am keen to get something approved. So if the committee were minded to agree some minor amendments that didn't impact the spirit of the document and its brevity, then obviously that would be a good way forward, delegated to chair and vice chair. But it is not meant to be obviously a detailed treatise on the legislation. And we set out the principle that if the Equality Act is breached, the council will not tolerate that. And that's the hook that it hangs on, really. So I don't really know. Obviously, having just been advised of these changes now, I'm not really in a position to suggest drafting amendments.
And
So I was just going to say that then, okay, I'll leave it over to the other committee members. I just want to you know, this places me in a difficult position, to be honest. So I just think if other members are happy with it, then I'll go with what the majority of people want.
is there anybody else that has any concerns about
concern. Well, first of all, I was just going to say, and I know the answer is yes, but just to ask, in 4.3, you've got, here's the equality email. I assume that's monitored, and I just wondered how, presumably that's a generic address that more than one person can access in order to make sure that if somebody's on leave, it can get picked up.
Yes, but there aren't many of us monitoring it, but it is more than one person.
But it's
Yeah.
just making sure that
Yeah,
if
we've
you've
had
got
very
some-
little traffic into the inbox, but obviously under our strategy, that's something we want to work on, definitely.
It's just the practicality when there's so few people and it's one
Absolutely.
person, somebody goes away for 2 weeks, and that's the
Yeah.
one time sod's law that you get somebody that comes.
Definitely.
The other thing I was going to say is I think it's quite a good document, but I do take into account what you're saying, so I'd be quite happy with your proposal that we agree the spirit of the document today, if others are willing, with subject to minor changes that are in keeping with the thrust of the document and the brevity, that hopefully would mean that then you'd feel that you could comfortably. Clearly, that's asking you, Eleanor, to be part of that and to make sure that you are then comfortable with that. But that sounds to me like a very good compromise that allows us to not have to wait for another committee cycle for it to come back, but to ensure that everyone is happy, because I think it's important that everybody in the council is happy with it.
Stanley?
Chair, thanks very much. I echo every word that Zoe's just spoken, basically. I think we are, we're obviously enhanced as a committee by having voices around this table that can take this to another level, as it were, in terms of their ability to see this, you know, in a sort of forensic way and so forth. And I get that totally. I see a document that actually, to my untutored eye, will stand the test of time. I'm perfectly content to see minor adjustments if the committee sees fit to include them. That's absolutely fine. But I think the spirit of it is absolutely spot on.
Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo what's been said as well, I am just really pleased to see that we've got this in place and that it's been reviewed. You know, it's really important that we keep that up to date as ideas and attitudes change. And it's really important that we represent and listen to everyone from every social identity group. And that's something I deeply value and uphold. So I'm very happy to support this with whatever wording we add to say that amendments can be made. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we do need to remind ourselves the purpose of the policy. It is not a legalistic document, and whom the audience is. If some small amount of wording adds clarity, that's fine. If it actually makes it harder to read and harder to understand and overly legalistic, then I think that's potentially a problem. And I was going to make the comment anyway. Paragraph 1.3 of the policy, you know, that list of protected characteristics within the Equality Act 2010, I think is an extremely useful reminder, because I do think there are members of the council and potentially staff that don't understand that those things are set out in law currently.
Sorry, obviously I've been just thinking on my feet because I didn't have any notice of this, but it does occur to me that we could put a glossary behind it, which might be helpful for people like customers and suppliers, and would give some more sort of detail around. And there are established glossaries, including. I know that some of our public bodies had published glossaries explaining what the legislation was meaning. So there could be an accompanying document that could go on the website that could help. So I'm just conscious one of your first comments, Councillor Round, was about it lacking depth. And what I don't want to do is open up the document to take us to where the strategy needs to be, which is all the ways in which we need to be different and better, which is all those strategic aims and actions where we need to really hold ourselves to account every year about all the things we do need to do different and better. But I still want this to be a more kind of simple set of statements about how we're going to act, But we could, perhaps if we could sort of agree that we're going to beef up that first section, purpose of the policy, and add a glossary, perhaps that would, if it, just picking up your word depth, perhaps if you felt that would give it more reference to the legislation, that could be a way to go.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think it is just a policy document. I'm not asking it for it to be a legal document at the end of the day, because if it's a legal document, it'll go into reams and reams and reams of paper, and then we'll all tie ourselves up in knot. It is just a policy document, but even if it's a policy document, we do have to get some of the very basic elements in that document. And I think I'm, inclined to agree with what Sian is saying, that if we can have a glossary attached to it or something more substantial, that is fine. I just think we need to be quite robust as a council in terms of our policies going forward, in terms of the legislation, and make sure that the council is protected going forward. So yeah, I think I'd be very amenable to that. But I am very conscious it is just a policy document, so you can't encompass everything, and it is meant for ease of reading. But it's just the things that just came to light immediately to me. Day in, day out, I work with this, policies around this legislation, and I know what pitfalls do occur on a regular basis. So that's why I was just bringing the breadth of my knowledge to the table, really.
So perhaps that glossary could potentially include things like definition of direct and indirect discrimination. So in terms of the actual before us, that is to approve the policy amendment, can we vote approving that with the caveat that glossary will be developed and approved by Chair and Vice Chair to append this policy? Oh, sorry, there's one more speaker. Yep. Councillor Roy? Oh, you were voting. Okay. Right, can I have a show of hands, those who are for? And, yeah. We'll move on to item number 6, which is the unreasonable customer behaviour policy, and it's back to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pity that we are recommending an unreasonable customer behaviour policy, but we're in good company in doing so, and the majority of councils already have an unreasonable customer behaviour policy, so it's not one of our happiest agenda items. Obviously there are lots of reasons and context in which the way that customers deal with the council can become challenging, and it isn't the case that things are clear-cut insofar as how we should deal with them, and there are a number of legal obligations on the council to continue dealing with customers almost come what may in some circumstances. So I would very much want to preface this policy with a reassurance that this policy is not to exclude people from their legally entitled rights to access council services. However, where we are currently as a local authority is we don't have an overarching corporate policy in place to support staff and indeed councillors and volunteers in circumstances where customer behaviour becomes very challenging. So we've put together a corporate policy as much as anything to make sure that there's a good degree of transparency for customers and council representatives, as I've called them, as to what sorts of things will become unacceptable and how we'll deal with them. And it's also worth saying that in putting that together, I've obviously drawn on other sources, including the Local Government Ombudsman's own guidance, and they have a slightly stratified approach in separating out unreasonably vexatious from unacceptable from high risk. And I think it's important that we definitely don't tar everybody with the same brush in that scenario. In putting together that corporate policy, obviously it is based on lived experience. We do have a number of situations that we actively manage in relation to customers. And it requires somebody of an appropriate level of seniority in the council who's one step removed to work out what measures should be put in place. So we've identified that at head of service level. And so really the policy provides us, as I said, again, with quite a clear and simple mechanism to sort of address concerns around customer behaviour at sort of at 3 different levels. We do have mechanisms in place to share information already about high-risk behaviour, so again, to reassure you on that. And the Joint Consultative and Safety Committee does receive reports quarterly on the health and safety alerts that come through the system where there's been an adverse incident affecting staff. And I'd like to roll out that notification for councillors as well, so that we've got the opportunity to collect data for everybody. So I'm talking about the more sort of high end of issues now, but we've got a paper going to Standards Committee next week where we're talking about personal safety there as well. And I think just having a one council approach on it is helpful. And I don't know what your own observations are, members, but certainly it's something I hear very regularly, that things are different than they were 2 or 3 years ago, and behaviour can be different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So this behaviour is as much a shield as a sword, if you understand me. It's not supposed to be punitive. It's supposed to set out some reasonable parameters. Clearly, if a customer felt that we were unreasonable in applying this policy, they have a remedy, and that remedy is to go to the Ombudsman. And I would expect, although we haven't been in that situation, I would expect the Ombudsman to ask us, what is our policy for dealing with these things? And I think this will equip us to answer that better. Obviously, as things stand at the moment, we have reference to unreasonable behaviour in relation to our complaints policy, but that only really positions you as a complainant as opposed to somebody who's encountering the council in different contexts. So that's the background to the policy, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Go to Councillor Murray.
Just one question. What consideration has been given to the fact that some unreasonable behaviour may come from people with mental health difficulties? Has that been taken into account and allowed for in that policy?
Yes, thank you. It certainly has been taken into account. Obviously, the drafting of the policy has been a joint effort with heads of service. Mental health issues does definitely contribute to some of the customer behaviour that we do find challenging at Trinity Street, 89 High Street, and in relation to our civil enforcement work. What we've said in this policy is where a customer has special access requirements, these will be fairly taken into account. And in relation to the high risk behaviour section, we talk about harm to themselves or others, and we talk about referrals to agencies. Beyond that, the team's experience was it's difficult to work out what else to put in an overarching policy, and it's more about how we support the behind the scenes with the training and sharing information to an appropriate extent internally. Frontline staff have asked for more training on managing escalating mental health situations, and you'll be aware that there aren't that many accessible customer service buildings in Worcester City now where you can walk in and start a conversation. So some of the people who come in aren't even our customers. So it is very much a live issue, and I'm grateful for the question. So it is taken into account, but again, at a high level policy level, it's difficult to know sort of what else to write other than we'll take it into account and we'll look at which agencies we will link with.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I welcome the drafting of this policy, because it kind of arose really from health and safety reports and the discussion at the Joint Consultative Staff Committee that kind of identified this gap, and that there are risks for staff in dealing with customers who are behaving unreasonably. Or we deal with that. And I have to say, you know, that as a councillor, I recognise behaviours within it. So I think, you know, it is a useful step forward, and obviously kind of a delicate balance to be struck, isn't there, between people in need of services and people being unreasonable. I do have some specific questions, if I may, because obviously it's only been issued with the papers for this committee. So in paragraph 1.4, when it talks about special access requirements, I wonder whether is it appropriate to add about making those needs known? Because how are we to know that someone has special access requirements unless they tell us? Because it is also kind of hazardous to guess or to make assumptions. That's one thought I had. Then just to kind of think through the section 6 around the sort of warnings, reviews and appeals. And I wonder, you know, if within that, I'm not seeing, is there a place for an overview of, because this is potentially sort of each service having sight of the problems within their area, and I absolutely understand about not necessarily communicating across areas, because a customer might be behaving unreasonably in one place with housing officers, but still want a brown bin, so to speak. But with regard to the sort of totality of the council's experience, no, is it within the health and safety report? Maybe a bit of a gap. I'm not quite sure how best. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is an interesting point and a bit of a dilemma, because the committee might be aware that if we share information that's been collected for one purpose for another without good reason, that can itself be a problem in terms of data protection. That we have words in the data protection legislation like necessary and proportionate. So it's not that we can't share, but it's got to be kind of necessary and proportionate, as I say. So one area where I have attempted to address that is in 4.8. Appropriate notes will be placed on the relevant service case recording system, because of course we don't have one customer contact system for the whole council. We have, you know, different systems in housing than 89. Anyway, ordinarily the only information which will be shared across multiple council services will be the name of the customer and the fact of the behaviour designation, unless the relevant head of service considers it necessary to share additional information. So trying to strike that balance again without saying that we're going to just kind of overshare information about our customers, but providing a mandate to do so if it's necessary, judgment of the head of service. What then I've said about warnings, reviews and appeals is that if there is a designation and we have to let the customer know that we've designated a service has designated their behaviour as unreasonable, then they can appeal that, and they'd use the customer complaints policy to do that. And that would provide that wider review, because that would have to be done by somebody else.
I suppose I was thinking of a sort of anonymised report, in the sense of, you know, how many customers have been placed under one of these categories, and you know, which some departments suffer from it more than others. I wasn't necessarily thinking of, you know, sitting looking at a list of names on pink papers. Does that, if that helps?
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, I'd misunderstood. So we could, for example, say in here that the Joint Consultative and Safety Committee will maintain oversight of the use of the policy, for example. Yeah.
Stanley?
Chair, thanks very much.
I really just to kind of develop Lynn's point a little bit. In what way, if at all, can we incorporate some of this into what I'm sort of trying to get an answer in a sense for is at what level, at what appropriate level can our experience with this, the way that this document, as we adopt it, goes forward, and then trace its effectiveness, particularly in terms of, you know, the mental health issues. Because, I mean, I'm struck straight away by the fact that there's been this sort of spike in that particular issue within society, and it matches almost exactly what we all know as emerged out of the lockdown period and so forth. And I think, you know, we're all, as councillors and I'm sure as officers, you know, trying to sort of get a firmer grip of exactly what that means in terms of our own residents' day-to-day lives. And, you know, in what appropriate way can the knowledge, the information that we're gaining from this be sort of brought down to a level where we're discussing it as you know, in various committees and so forth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that the best way of having regular oversight is to enhance what the JCSC already does. So obviously quarterly at JCSC, you're seeing those accident reports. And what we've had good success. I mean, accident reports is now the wrong phrase because we've had a lot of success encouraging staff to notify the system of adverse incidents, but they will be ones where there has been effectively higher risk behaviour. So they aren't going to pick up kind of persistently vexatious people. I think it would be excessive to ask our colleagues to notify those through the system. But in terms of that high risk and safety concerns, they will be reported through JCSE. And to enhance that reporting, we can make sure that we ask people to note whether they were concerned that there were mental health issues. In other respects, I guess there's a level of sort of undisclosed mental health issues that the staff who are dealing with the issues there and then suspect, but you know, aren't in a position to diagnose or comment on. And people aren't necessarily that forthcoming with us about why they're behaving like they are. So I think staff may have concerns, but they feel they've just got to deal with the issues that are presenting in front of them because, you know, they're not really in a position to take that mental health element any further themselves. There probably is something that we could build on in terms of then the personal safety angle, where it would be great if we had a stronger multi-agency response and that Worcester City Council was able to call on support from mental health agencies and the police, and that we had a joined up conversation around that. Possibly the place to raise that would be the safety partnership meetings. And to track there, we could share our data about escalating incidents, and we could ask other agencies whether they see the same trend and what they think collectively we should do about it. So that would be another forum where we could raise it.
Thank you. I'm just, in terms of sort of if we sign it off this evening, does it formally need to go through P&R? Oh, that's one. Sian, for the change, Sian is shaking her head. I think it is important, isn't it, now that the policy will be backed up with staff training, which I imagine is the idea, and actually some public comms around it, so that we tell the public as to what is unreasonable behaviour. And you know, some of that public debate may be uncomfortable, but then we and do suffer from behaviour.
Yes, so I mean, I think as a new policy, as I guess it's a work in progress in the sense that, you know, it's only once you roll out a new policy that you can then get the feedback to know, you know, how effective it is, whether it's, you know, providing a sufficient framework for service and so on to act appropriate ways. The policy which is trying to balance the risk to staff with customers' needs. I think that in particular there's sort of helpful to have authorization that doesn't label brush, if you like, people that may be safety risk to staff, same category as people who are sort of a nuisance. storm. So I think that framework, I think, provides enough flexibility, safeguarding within this to review obligations to staff and to our customers. But as I say, so the policy has a review date of 1 year, which I think is a reasonable compromise. It's probably sooner than that. Probably not enough time for a policy like this to bed in and its results. There's ongoing monitoring committee as well. For safeguards, ensure that it's not overreaching, which I don't think it is, but provides a useful framework for staff and.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to remind members that in this instance, I was keen that the policy covered members as well. So I've called it council representatives, the council's representatives, and it's, it's any time that somebody is dealing on council business with a customer. The customer is anyone who's having that contact. So I appreciate it's a bit circular, hopefully not Kafkaesque, but it's to catch, you all as community leaders undertaking roles. Some of you will be aware that when the Local Government Association issued their revised model code of conduct for members, which the councils adopted, they were very clear and very supportive that councillors have a right to disconnect from abusive and harmful contact. So I appreciate that's only one type of customer under this policy, which we've acknowledged, but I did also just want to, in this policy, just reassure councillors that this will be on our website. We'll put some pleasant and supportive text around it on our website. We won't make it look horrible. And I think I want councillors to feel comfortable to use the policy too and say, I'm really sorry, but under the council's policy, I think we've now reached this point. You can then refer into the relevant head of service if it relates to a service and effectively hand that over. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, again, at the more sort of unpleasant end of behaviour, we've got that conversation at Standards Committee next week about personal safety, and there may be some recommendations coming out of Standards Committee about making sure that councillors feel they've got sufficient measures in place in terms of personal safety and anything else that the Standards Committee think should be done to support our councillors.
Thank you. We'll move to the vote. Voting on approving the policy. Transfer those who are for. Any other business? I don't believe there's any other business. Urgent matters. Before we move to the exempt item. We'll do the item that involves the disclosure of exempt information. Yep, is everybody happy to turn off the broadcast now?